Each of Gig Harbor's 17 Netsheds has a story, and in most cases they're named for the family that built them. This tour of the Netsheds starts at the head of the bay out to the entrance of the harbor. The Gilich Netshed was built in 1932 by Tony Gilich and passed on to his son Don. Don's grandmother, Josephine Novak, was a member of the Puyallup tribe, and Don became an elder there. The lumber used to build the shed was salvaged from the Silver Glide dance hall. Its integrity, inside and out, is pristine. It's one of only a handful of fully operational commercial fishing docks, now known as the Blair Netshed. The Lovrovich Netshed was once known as the Marin's Netshed. Martin and Marty emigrated from the island of Susak, Croatia, and built the facility in the early 1950s. Their boat was the Defiance. The Lovrovich brothers are third-generation Croatians with a long history of fishing. They purchased the site in 1994. Their boats, Harbor Gem, Sea Fury, and Tradition, are well known in the harbor. The Bujacich Netshed was constructed by Jake, his brother George, and their father in 1948. They fished the Majestic together. An activist in local politics, Jake was the city's mayor and later a Pierce County commissioner. Although it is not being used as a fishing facility, it was used for picnics, clam bakes, cocktail parties, and poker games, and remains much the same inside and out. What Gig Harbor may lack in prominent historic landmarks is found in these simple over-the-water docks and sheds. The Ivanovich Netshed was originally constructed by Mato Ivanovich in 1937. Mato came from Pelješac, Croatia in 1910. He joined the crew under Pasko Dorotich as a greenhorn fisherman and fell in love with the work. He owned, operated a dozen boats over his career. His son Frank followed in his footsteps and ran the Equator. The site sold in 2012 and the Netshed was remodeled for private residential use. The Ancich Netshed was constructed in 1924 by Martin and Anna Ancich. Because it was one of the only drive-aboard piers left in the harbor, it served as a load-unload facility for many fishermen for more than 40 years, until the maritime pier opened in 2012. In addition to operating as a fishing and moorage facility, in the 1970s, the family home and Netshed were leased to the Coast Guard. That facility sold in 2020. There was also the Ancich Brothers Netshed. Originally constructed in 1928 by Peter Ancich, the first Netshed burned down. A second was constructed in 1954. Brothers John and Joe had a 16 by 16 foot bait tank from a tuna clipper that was used to heat tar and coat cotton nets to preserve them from rot. The open field above the Netshed provided room to lay them out to dry. John Ancich Jr. had a crew of 5 on his Purseiner, the Heritage. He died tragically aboard his vessel in 2001. The site sold to the city in 2012, and the Netshed was reconstructed. It is now Ancich Park. Years ago, the Castelan family had a house above the original shed located below street grade, known as the Honeymoon Cottage, because so many newlyweds rented it. Today there is a dock which is active with the Jerkovich family's fishing vessels, the Pacific Raider and Pacific Grace. The Castelan Jerkovich Netshed is owned by Millville Condominiums and is used for marina storage. It was originally constructed by brothers Nick and Mike Castelan and brother-in-law John Jerkovich Sr. in the 1930s. The dock was extended in 1947 to accommodate moorage during all tides. The Malich dock was built around 1926. John Malich passed the property on to his sons John and Marco. It operated until the 60s when it was rented to Tony Scrivenich to store his fishing gear. Ken and Marco received title in 1974, but within 2 years, a storm destroyed the shed. Salvaged pilings were used to reconstruct a smaller dock, but no Netshed remains. It is currently being used for recreational moorage. The Puratich family immigrated to Gig Harbor from Croatia in 1918. Originally built in the 1930s, their Netshed burned and the current shed was constructed in the 1950s. Not visible from the street, it can only be seen from the water. In the 1980s, a number of heritage families created signs that were mounted on the top of their Netshed. It made it easier for boaters to find them. The term dock is used instead of netshed because it properly identifies the overwater wood deck or pier on pilings that is used for loading and unloading supplies and gear. Johnny Stanich built this shed in the 1940s, but the original structure was constructed around 1916 by Martin Stanich. Originally from Dubrovnik, Croatia, Martin ran the FV Welcome. In addition to fishing, Martin purchased a grocery store in 1924 that later became Stanich Grocery Store. It served the commercial fleet by supplying groceries on credit at the beginning of each season. The Stanich dock is currently used as a rental space. The Gilich Netshed was originally constructed in the 1930s by Andrew and Tony Gilich. It was sold to Paul Gustafson in the early 80s. The building was remodeled to become Arabella's Landing Marina Clubhouse around 1985. The Netshed was built in 1910 by Tony Novak. Next to it was their home. The Novaks were one of the earliest families to arrive from Croatia and help establish the Millville plat in the late 1880s. The shed has been altered with a second story. It has operated as a restaurant since 2009. Built in 1920, the family home in yellow sits behind the tool room and net shed. It was used as a fishing facility until it sold in 2005. It's now a private residence. The original pitch of the shed was altered by Emmett Ross to increase the width for storage. By the 1960s, a shed roof was constructed over the open end. Emmett Ross and his crew repair the net at his net shed. Peter Skansie immigrated from Croatia in 1886 and convinced his brothers Mitchell, Joseph, and Andrew to join him. Andrew was a stonemason, built the family home in 1908 and the net shed in 1910. Constructed in the late 1880s, the Skansie shipyard evolved into a major boat building establishment for Puget Sound's purse seine fishing fleet. The family would fish in the spring and summer and build boats in the winter. The Babich family is related to the original settlers of Gig Harbor, the Jurisic family, who immigrated from Croatia in 1869. Spiro came to Gig Harbor in 1910. He and his wife, Julia Skansie, built their family home in the first of two net sheds in 1938. 3 years later, the second shed was built. Spiro owned 19 boats over his lifetime and was known as a highliner fisherman. Both sons were fishermen, and each one inherited a dock. The Babiches had the only net sheds with deep water during most tides. Peter's son, Randy, fished his boat, the Paragon, until it sold in 2021. Both docks were sold and are now privately owned for residential use. Another brother, Peter Skansie, built his net shed in about 1920. It's located near the mouth of the bay and is one of only a handful of sheds whose gabled ends are not parallel to the shoreline. It's currently used as a private clubhouse by its owners. The main building of the Tarabochia net shed was constructed in 1907. It operated as a livery business where the Mogin family built flat-bottom, two-person rowing skiffs until 1940, when it sold to Nick Tarabochia Sr. He enlarged the original footprint to become a commercial fishing net shed. It's located just outside the entrance to the harbor, standing alongside pilings left from the old ferry landing pier that shut down when the first Narrows Bridge was constructed in 1940. It's currently used for repairing and storing nets. And the Scrivenage Net Shed is on the east side of Gig Harbor in Pierce County and is the only one built on that side of the bay because access was limited. It's currently used as a residence. Our foundation is committed to honoring the Skansie family legacy, protecting Skansie Park, and remembering the stories of the fishing families for future generations.
Cada